Howdy do, buckaroos. Welcome to the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast. Today is Friday. It is the second day of April 2021. I am your host, Kelly Gamont. With me today, I have Andrew Orr. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, TGIF, everyone.
TGISF, as Security Friday makes its triumphant return. So we are here again to bring you the latest in news and updates on the security front. And we're going to get right to it because the first one we have is news about Snapchat in the old business portion of the program. To talk about ad tracking, Snapchat has made some waves.
Right. So the old business is real quick. There's a feature coming in iOS 14.5, although it was introduced with 14. That is app tracking transparency. And this means that in the future, when an app wants to use your data for advertising purposes or other tracking purposes, it will be required to open up a pop-up window that says, do you want to allow this app to use your data for tracking? And you can say yes or no. So with this news is that from the Financial Times, they say Snap Inc., the company behind Snapchat, they say they have found kind of a workaround around app tracking transparency. Now, they call this probability matching or probabilistic matching. I haven't really dug into it much, but it's just some workaround to, track people even with app tracking transparency. It sounds like even if you say no, they could try to find a way to track you anyway, which is, of course, great.
Yeah. When this, the thing you have to wonder about with all of this is with anytime something like this happens, the thing we always ask here is like, okay, that sounds good, but good for who? And this sounds great for Snapchat and terrible for anybody with Snapchat installed.
Yeah. So some of the quote from the article that I shared was, Snap wanted to gather data from companies that analyze whether people have responded to ad campaigns, included aggregated IP addresses, and it hoped that it could take that data and cross-reference it against the information it holds on its own users already to identify and track them.
Wonderful.
Now, they do claim that they will stop these experiments once app tracking transparency has officially been released. However, there was another sentence that says it continues to work on other quote-unquote privacy-centric solutions. So
I think you mispronounced spying there.
Yeah.
Private to see the end of that sentence sort of negates all the rest of it. To monetize its users, like that's all Snapchat's trying to do.
Yeah.
And honestly, I didn't realize that there was that there were still people like on Snapchat that to be monetized, because I remember hearing stories about like people going online. I don't know, like a Kardashian went online and talked smack about Snapchat and the stock price dropped $1 billion or something. I don't remember.
Okay.
So I just I didn't realize there were still a whole lot of people using Snapchat. Maybe there are. I was never one of those people because initially they had some real sketchy behavior with what they were doing with user data. So I just didn't bother. And I'm still and right now I'm feeling pretty good about sticking to that decision.
Yeah.
So I haven't really missed it. I thought it was interesting though that they said, like, we're doing this, but we're gonna stop when app tracking transparency comes out, which is weird.
I didn't add this to my article just because I couldn't remember where I read this, but I don't know, like a month or two ago, whatever, weeks ago, I had read quotes from, I know Twitter said this, that they said iOS 14 privacy controls could be good for the business because it kind of levels the playing field a bit. I thought that Snap also said that, but maybe not. Maybe it was just Twitter.
Yeah, I don't remember on that one. I don't remember on that one either. But the one thing I can point out is, I know we've said this before, but we've had at least like 2 betas, I think, of 14.5 since the last time you and I were like, yeah, it should be any day now. Released it publicly. But we've had another beta, so maybe some of that is just nailing this down. So hopefully that comes out sooner. So we'll have to see. In the meantime, keep in mind that if you're using Snapchat is trying to find a way to monetize you. So just remember that. Next, we have an interesting thing we mentioned on a previous edition of TDO, which is this way that you can sort of communicate secretly with somebody without using the Messages app to do it.
Yes, we briefly mentioned this, and now I've dug into it a little bit more based on, some knowledge I have about digging into Apple security. So this TikToker, I don't want to try to pronounce this name.
I don't blame you.
So he discovered this tip that you can do with Apple devices, and he figured out that because Apple Notes can be shared with other Apple users as a sort of collaboration feature, because of that, you can kind of use it as a secret messenger as opposed to maybe using iMessage.
Okay.
And there are various reasons for doing so. But as I mentioned before, what I liked is that the reason he tried to dig into this is he says he was inspired by some victims of domestic abuse who had reached out to him to ask if there was some way to hide certain apps and messages. And so I think this is a very noble tip to tell people.
Yeah. And it was an interesting implementation too of like just sort of routing around using something that already exists.
Yeah. And I dug into it a bit just to figure out, because what we were asking was, so this is secret, but is it private? And we're going to talk about this later. Is something secure, or is it private, or maybe one or the other, or both? Yeah. In this case, I think it is secure. So I think this is a fine line. It is a secure way to send people messages because, let's see. Hang on. Okay, here's the right tab. So sending messages this way, as I wrote, is secret. And it is also secure because, as Apple shares in its iCloud security overview page, a lot of iCloud content, such as Apple Notes, iCloud Notes, is encrypted on the server and when it's being transmitted to Apple. But as I pointed out, that's not really the same as end-to-end encryption. That's something a little bit different.
Right.
However, Apple has a different page where they say when a person puts a password on a note, it does become end-to-end encrypted using an encryption algorithm called AES-GCM. But again, so on yet a different page, it says that notes that aren't end-to-end encrypted with a passphrase can be shared with others. Or to put it another way, you can't password protect notes, aka shared notes are not end-to-end encrypted.
Okay.
So I added another addition to my digging into this, where I say it's also good to point out that iCloud backup does not include content already stored in iCloud, such as iCloud Notes. And the reason I think this is important to point out is because iCloud backup is not end-to-end encrypted. Apple can, under certain circumstances, help you recover your iCloud backups by the form of, helping you recover your Apple ID password when you need it. And that's why I say that it's secure, but I guess it just depends on what you want your level of security to be. I think for most people, iCloud Notes are secure, even though they're not end-to-end encrypted. No. And even shared iCloud Notes, I think, are still secure for most of us. But if you're in certain situations, like if you're a journalist dealing with sensitive sources, or maybe you're a whistleblower, perhaps you want to use another service that is, as I pointed out in my article, one app that I've used before is called Standard Notes. And I recommend that because it is end-to-end encrypted, but it is also open source. And open source is something pretty, like, it doesn't mean an app is secure in and of itself, but it's still important just because it means you can go and look at the code and see what's what, basically.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before where, something being open source is not quite the same. I think, Andrew, we talked about this on Mac Voices Live recently, where what the difference is between security and privacy, and how to make some of those things, like how to have that conversation, because some of them are different. So I think that was the reason this sounded like a familiar conversation that we had. But also part of that is security through obscurity, right? Like if what you're worried about is somebody going through your texts, like they're going to go to messages. And if they can't find Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp on your phone, or they find those and go through them, like it's never going to occur to most people who are more interested in who you're talking to, with ill intent, we'll say. It's not going to occur to most of those people to look at notes for that kind of stuff, right? So that's another like advantage to this. And of course, us talking about it is not helping that. But if somebody's sitting down to go like, who are you talking to? It's not going to occur to most people to go, oh, notes is a way that you are talking to somebody. So.
I mean, like you kind of alluded to, I hope we aren't giving tips to the bad guys, because going back to the beginning, this TikToker was inspired by, victims of domestic abuse who wanted some way to hide messages. So, they could create a note in Apple Notes that says grocery list, but it could actually be, trying to communicate with other people or law enforcement about the situation. And that's just another way to obscure that.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves over time, I think. Depending on how this all turns out. So our next bit of information, our next bit of news and update is also about App Store apps, and it's about Apple blocking apps that are using something for tracking data.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of related to the Snapchat story we were talking about earlier, just because it involves tracking. So this article by Forbes said, Apple is starting to reject app updates to apps that are, trying to track people because of iOS 14.5. I dug a little bit into this, and there is some more details other than that. So they were talking about this app SDK, a development SDK from a company called Adjust. Okay. And Adjust, it says on their website that their SDK can track something called attribution and in-app events. Now, to their credit, in my opinion, their SDK is open source, and they post it on GitHub. So they shared a message that Apple has been sending to these developers. And it says something like, your app uses algorithmically converted device and usage data to create a unique identifier in order to track the user. So again, to me, it sounds like what Snapchat was doing. These are companies or developers maybe trying to find ways to track people, even if they say no to that tracking. Now, to their credit, again, besides the open source part, it does say Forbes notes that in the last 14 hours since that article was published yesterday, Adjust has removed certain parts of their code from the SDK, which accesses data like CPU type, how much memory your phone has, its charging status, battery level, et cetera, and those things sound kind of innocent by themselves, but all in all, if you combine all these data points about you, they can be used as a way to create a profile about you, also known as fingerprinting.
Yeah, for good or ill. And part of the reason I mentioned that is because I was looking at the site before the show, the Adjust website, and they have this whole section of solutions. So they talk about like why travel apps want to use them, why e-commerce apps want to use them, why subscription stuff is great through them. And one of the things that they make something out of on their website is fraud. Like, we can help you stop with fraud. We can help keep bots from gaming your, whatever it is. So, like, it seems like maybe some of what they're doing is, like, maybe trying to use their powers for good, but at least initially, it sounds like some of what they're doing is a little sketchy. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that, because it sounds, I won't say sketchy, but it sounds like maybe their stance is evolving here a little bit. We'll have to see. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where that ends up. We have another bit of information to talk about with iOS and Android, and what data collection looks like on both of those operating systems.
So this is something that I was particularly interested in, because this is just another thing that I kind of dug into. So on Tuesday of this week, this person called Douglas Leith from Ireland's Trinity College, he published a study about user data collection on iOS and Android. Okay. And the reason I wanted to dig into this further is just because I feel like, so there was this sentence in the middle of his paper that said Android sends 20 times more data to Google than iOS sends to Apple, which makes for a great headline. But in my opinion, it seems like the news websites made more of that than this person did. Probably. So to be fair to him, I just want to say, news websites, they ran with this, but that sentence was, like I said, it was just kind of thrown in the middle. It wasn't in his abstract or conclusion. So his conclusion, from what I gathered, says that when a smartphone is idle, both iOS and Android shares data with Apple and Google every 4.5 minutes on average, which to me it's fine. It's totally believable. But so going back to that sentence about Android collecting more data. So as I was digging into this paper, he says, the quote that I shared was, during the first 10 minutes of startup, the Pixel handset sends around 1 megabyte of data, compared with the iPhone, which is around 42 kilobytes of data to Apple. And he concluded that this means Google is collecting 20 times more data than Apple is. But I don't think that is correct, because in one of the tables that he shares in his paper, table 1, this is a summary of the data shared with Apple and Google when the user is not logged in. That's what it says. And it's just it's a checklist of different types of data, like your phone number, your location, cookies, your IP address. And it shows that both companies collect roughly the same amount of data. And if you want to count these check marks, Apple collects I think 2 more data points than Google does. Yeah. And so I thought that was weird, because this, like the summary is, Google is collecting 20 times more data based on the file size, but if they're collecting roughly the same amount of data as shown in this table, then what's going on?
Right.
And so I asked a couple of questions in my article, like, is Apple and Google using different compression algorithms when our handsets are, sending our data to their servers, or maybe Google or Apple is sending compression and Google is not? And Ars Technica, I reported in my article, it sounds like they talked to Google, and Google says the methodology is flawed. Now, Google is Google. Of course, they're going to say that. But like I said, combined with what we have already been discussing, to me, that the whole thing seems kind of shaky.
Yeah.
And so at the end of my article, I said, at the end of the day, I don't know what's going on either, but I don't think this is the correct conclusion to be drawn based on the evidence that we received in this paper.
Yeah.
Because data can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I think there are just too many questions to ask to definitively say that Google's collecting way more data.
Well, and like the thing that when I was reading through this, after it went up, I was reading the article and I got down to the Pixel is sending a megabyte of data and Apple is sending 52K. And the first thing I thought was maybe Android is less efficient with the way with its communication. And I didn't think anything more than that.
Yeah.
Because it's not logged in. So it's not sending, like, if it's not a logged in user, I'm assuming that means not logged into anything. So that means it's not checking mail. It's not updating Find My Friends. It's not, looking for app updates. It's not doing any of the regular stuff that lots of people do on their phones when they're signed into them. So that was the thing I was wondering. I'm just like, maybe it's just not as efficient. So I feel like there may be more to this story, but I think there's a larger conversation to be had about what your devices are doing when you're not doing anything with your devices.
Yeah. And like you were saying, as the paper points this out, based on the method of data collection that they were trying to figure out. And that says, the study assumes a privacy-conscious but busy/non-technical user who, when asked, does not select options that share data with Apple and Google, but otherwise leaves handset settings at their default value. And that is a lot of words to say. In my translation, this is just a blank smartphone at default settings, which is totally fine, I think. I think that's valid. Yeah.
That's a good place to start. But I definitely want to find out a whole lot more about, what gets transmitted. So I think this is going to continue to evolve. So part of why we wanted to talk about it today is because I think this is going to be one that we hear more about as more information becomes available, as some of it becomes more public, all that kind of thing. So definitely going to be interesting. We will talk more about it later. That's going to do it for us today. We had a little bit of our security privacy conversation in the middle of the show, so we don't have a tip for you at the end today. If you have stuff you want us to talk about, or if there's a question that you have that you would like us to answer for you here on the show, you can get us at observations@macobserver.com. You can go to TMO Daily on Twitter, or you can leave comments in the show notes. So Andrew, thanks so much for coming by today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And as always, have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, have a good weekend. I'm your host, Kelly Gamont. I will talk to all of you on Monday. In the meantime, be excellent to each other and let's be careful out there.